In the intellectual quarters of Western Europe, from the quiet cafes of Berlin to the digital hubs of Paris, a subtle structural shift is transforming how the younger generation views survival. While the crowd is hopelessly trapped in a cycle of immediate social validation, broadcasting every minor milestone online, an underground class of strategic actors is executing a different protocol. They are silently absorbing massive economic leverage, entirely hidden from the vision of their closest peers. If you commit to this transmission until the final sentence, you will gain access to an invisible ledger of absolute control, a blueprint that guarantees structural autonomy and a profound understanding of how real wealth operates beneath the surface of the modern economy. Consider this your quiet entry into a closed financial matrix, a mechanism that transforms silent discipline into an unbreakable fortress against global instability. For the individuals who deliberately obscure their financial coordinates, the surrounding world routinely assigns a series of predictable labels. You are often classified as emotionally detached, excessively guarded, or inherently selfish by a collective that cannot comprehend long-term calculation. However, analyzing this specific pattern through the rigorous lens of cognitive biology reveals an incredibly sophisticated defense architecture. This absolute privacy is not an error in your social character, but rather a highly engineered survival mechanism operating within your nervous system. The average person simply lacks the neurological bandwidth required to maintain this level of strategic discipline. It represents a precise calibration of how the human brain processes environmental threat, trust, and structural sovereignty. To accurately diagnose this hidden dynamic, we must dissect the internal mechanics of social human behavior. For the standard individual, capital is treated as a social tool to buy visibility, immediate relevance, and validation from the tribe. This constant performance triggers an immediate release of dopamine within the nucleus accumbens, the primary reward engine of the brain. Every time a person showcases a luxury acquisition, discusses an increased salary, or drops hints about their net worth, they receive a brief chemical injection. It is an addictive cycle of public vulnerability that leaves the participant entirely dependent on external feedback. They are trapped in a systemic loop, continuously trading their actual long-term leverage for a fleeting moment of artificial status. In absolute contrast, individuals who maintain strict financial secrecy possess an entirely different neurological blueprint. Brain imaging data demonstrates that during complex resource management, these actors show intense activity within the prefrontal cortex, the specific zone dedicated to executive control and long-term planning. Furthermore, extensive clinical research conducted in the year 2021 and published in the Journal of Behavioral Economics documents an elevated activation inside the insula. The insula serves as the primary internal alarm system of the human anatomy, constantly monitoring external risk and internal bodily signals. In the silent wealth builder, this system is exceptionally functional, dialed to a highly sensitive protective frequency. The brain recognized early in development that exposing metrics creates immediate systemic vulnerability, and it responded by constructing an impenetrable shield. For these quiet operators, the internal chemical reward loop has been completely reconfigured. Dopamine is no longer triggered by external applause or the envy of peers, but is instead released when the entire operational system is perfectly secure. The psychological satisfaction comes from knowing that the overarching strategy is executing flawlessly behind closed doors, completely free from external dependencies. This brings us to a deeply unsettling reality regarding contemporary societal behavior. Most people live under the total tyranny of what behavioral psychologists define as tribal financial compliance. Their financial choices are entirely dictated by the crushing weight of social comparison, causing them to accumulate massive liabilities just to maintain a fragile position within the group. This desperate hunt for collective acceptance is merely biological obedience disguised as personal choice. The individuals who deliberately mask their economic capacity have broken entirely free from this exhausting systemic loop. They do not withhold data out of a desire to manipulate or deceive those around them. Instead, they are operating from a foundation of individualistic autonomy, a rare psychological state where self-worth is entirely self-contained. They do not require the validation of a social gathering to confirm their true position in the economic hierarchy. They are simply not playing the same game as the crowd, and they are not even operating in the same stadium. This fundamental divergence in human behavior frequently causes severe friction within immediate family dynamics. The untrained observer often assumes that a financially quiet individual is emotionally cold, distant, or completely lacking in empathy. This is a profound misinterpretation of a highly disciplined redirection of energy. Behavioral evidence proves that individuals with high financial privacy do not lack emotional depth. Rather, they choose to invest their emotional bandwidth into multi-generational security, long-term stability, and targeted protection for the few individuals they genuinely value. They execute these structural maneuvers quietly, entirely free from the need for public approval or an audience. There is a massive structural difference between someone who is indifferent to their family and someone who is quietly ensuring that their family will never experience economic vulnerability. From the outside, to an uneducated eye, these two distinct behaviors look perfectly identical. For a significant portion of this quiet group, this calculated silence did not begin as an intellectual theory, but as an adaptive survival response to early trauma. It is highly probable that during their childhood, resources were a constant source of domestic volatility and severe conflict. They may have witnessed a parent being financially exploited or watched absolute trust get weaponized by predators, prompting the developing brain to establish a permanent boundary. This unconscious programming functions as a hidden script, running silently in the background of every major executive decision. If your strict privacy is actually a past wound that has successfully healed into structural armor, that is not a sign of psychological defect. It is one of the most brilliant evolutionary adaptations a human nervous system can perform. Your brain took a painful environmental lesson and converted it into an automated, permanent protection protocol. You did not consciously select this configuration, but your biology chose it for you to guarantee your absolute safety. You are not broken, cold, or unnecessarily secretive. You are simply engaged in an entirely different matrix, where the scoreboard is invisible to everyone except yourself. While the modern world continues to celebrate the loud performers who exhibit their wealth publicly, history and the mathematics of compounding interest always favor the silent actors. The individuals broadcasting their assets are optimizing for immediate dopamine, while you are optimizing for permanent structural durability. You are not lagging behind the collective pace. You are simply operating in an insulated space where no one is permitted to watch. This absolute concealment of resources is merely the foundational layer of a much larger strategic architecture. The real psychological battle begins when the people closest to you notice the subtle inconsistencies in your lifestyle, entering a completely different matrix of control that requires an entirely new set of rules to master.